The rising prevalence of Alzheimer's, a growing concern. Oh my dears, let me tell you about something that has been worrying me and so many others my age, the increasing cases of Alzheimer's. You know, when I was young, we hardly ever heard about this disease, but now it seems to be everywhere, affecting friends, family, and even some of us. I'll explain it the way I understand it, calmly and patiently, as I've learned over my many years of life. Alzheimer's is a disease that mainly affects us older folks. It makes our brain, this wonderful machine that accompanies us throughout life, start to fail. It's as if the gears get rusty, you know. Memories start to disappear, we get confused, and sometimes we even forget who we are or who are the people we love. I remember well when my dear friend Mrs. Johnson started showing the first signs. At first it was little things. She forgot where she had left her glasses or the name of a neighbor. We all laughed, thinking it was just absent-mindedness. "Oh, that's just old age," we'd say. But over time we realized it was something more serious. Mrs. Johnson started getting lost on her way to church, a route she had been taking for over 50 years. That's when we understood something was wrong. And it's not just Mrs. Johnson. With each passing day, we hear more stories like hers. Doctors say the number of people with Alzheimer's is increasing very quickly. They use complicated words like prevalence, but what this means in practice is that more and more people are being affected by this terrible disease. In the United States, for example, doctors say there are about 6 million people with Alzheimer's. That's a lot of people. It's as if the entire population of a large city was sick. And the worst part is that they think this number will more than double by 2050. Just imagine, 13 million people. It breaks your heart. And if you think that's a lot, wait until you hear about China. There, the numbers are even bigger. They say there are already 10 million people with Alzheimer's, and it could reach 40 million by 2050. It's as if almost the entire population of California had this disease. It's scary to think about it. But why is this happening? Well, doctors explain that it's because we're living longer. That's good, isn't it? We live longer, we see our grandchildren grow up, we enjoy life more. But unfortunately, living longer also means we have more chances of developing diseases like Alzheimer's. It's as if it were a race. The longer we stay on the track, the more chance we have of stumbling. And Alzheimer's is a pretty big stone in our path. This whole situation is worrying a lot of people. Hospitals, families, everyone is feeling the weight of this increase. It's as if a dark cloud was forming over our heads. The worst part is that we still don't really know how to cure Alzheimer's. Scientists are working hard, doing research, trying to understand the disease better. But for now, it's as if we're trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. It helps a little, but it doesn't solve the whole problem. That's why, my dears, it's so important that we talk about this. The more we understand about Alzheimer's, the better we can prepare ourselves and help those who need it. As that old saying goes, knowledge is power. And in the case of Alzheimer's, knowledge can mean a better life for many people. I don't want to scare you, but it's important that everyone knows what's happening. Alzheimer's is a big challenge, but together, with patience and love, we can face it. After all, isn't that how we've always dealt with life's problems? In the next chapter, I'll tell you the story of my friend Mr. Smith, who has been fighting Alzheimer's for a few years. It's a sad story, but also full of love and hope. The story of Mr. Smith, a journey with Alzheimer's. Oh, my dears, now I'm going to tell you about my friend Mr. Smith. It's a story that touches my heart every time I remember, but I think it's important to share so you can better understand what it's like to live with Alzheimer's. Mr. Smith was a strong man, you know, one of those who woke up with the rooster's crow and worked all day in the fields without complaining. He had a wide smile and bright eyes, always ready to tell a joke or help a neighbor. He and I had been friends for over 50 years, since we met at the church fair. It all started about 10 years ago, when Mr. Smith was 75 years old. At first, it was little things. He started forgetting where he had put his tools, or he'd get confused with the names of his grandchildren. We all thought it was just absent-mindedness, a normal thing for his age. After all, who among us doesn't forget things from time to time, right? But as time went on, things got worse. One day, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith's wife, told me crying that he had gone out to buy bread and got lost on the way back. Just imagine, he who knew every alley of that town like the back of his hand. That's when we decided to take him to the doctor. The doctor did several tests and said that word we all feared, Alzheimer's. It was as if the world had collapsed on us. Mr. Smith, always so strong and independent, now faced an enemy he couldn't see or touch. At first, Mr. Smith tried to hide it. He made jokes about his own confusion, said he was getting cuckoo. But we who knew him well saw the sadness in his eyes. It was as if, little by little, he was losing parts of himself. Over time, things got harder. Mr. Smith started forgetting how to dress himself. Sometimes he didn't recognize his own house and wanted to go home, even though he was already there. The most painful thing was when he didn't recognize Mrs. Smith or the children. In those moments, it was as if a piece of our heart broke. I remember one particular day that marked me deeply. It was Mr. Smith's birthday, and the whole family gathered to celebrate. They made a cake, sang happy birthday, but he sat there, looking at everyone with a confused expression. When his youngest grandson went to hug him, Mr. Smith asked, "Who is this boy?" The silence that followed was deafening. But you know, my dears, even in the midst of all this sadness, I saw something beautiful happen. I saw the love of Mr. Smith's family grow and strengthen. Mrs. Smith, with all her patience, cared for him day and night. The children took turns helping, and even the grandchildren participated, reading stories to Grandpa or simply holding his hand. One thing I learned watching Mr. Smith is that even when the mind fails, the heart still remembers. Many times he couldn't say Mrs. Smith's name, but his eyes would light up when she entered the room. He might not remember the words to his favorite song, but he would still tap his foot to the rhythm when he heard it. Alzheimer's is a cruel disease that erases memories like a strong wind erases footprints in the sand. But some marks are so deep that not even this disease can erase them completely. Love, kindness, the strongest emotions, these seem to stay until the end. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's is not easy. It's a long and often painful journey. Mrs. Smith often looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a sad look. But she never gave up. "He's my John," she would say, "in good times and bad." Mr. Smith's children also suffered a lot. Seeing their father, that strong man who had taught them so much, now needing help with the simplest things, was hard to accept. But they stayed united, supporting each other in difficult times. One thing Mr. Smith's family did that I thought was beautiful was to create a memory album. They gathered old photos, wrote down stories that Mr. Smith used to tell, kept important objects for him. On good days, they would sit with him and look at this album together. Sometimes it helped Mr. Smith remember things, other times it didn't, but it always brought a smile to his face. Unfortunately, Mr. Smith left us 2 years ago. It was 8 years of fighting against Alzheimer's. In the end, he no longer spoke, just stared into nothingness with those eyes that were once so bright. But until the last moment, his family was there, caring for him with love and affection. Mr. Smith's funeral was a mixture of sadness and celebration. Sadness for the loss, of course, but also a celebration of the life he had, the love he left behind, the memories that, even if he forgot, continue to live on in all of us who knew him. Mr. Smith's story is not unique. There are millions of Mr. Smiths out there fighting against Alzheimer's, and millions of Mrs. Smiths caring for them with infinite love. It's a difficult battle, but one that teaches us a lot about love, patience, and the importance of valuing every moment we have with the people we love. So, my dears, if you know someone who is going through this, offer help. Sometimes just a visit, a conversation, or offering to stay with the patient for a few hours so the caregiver can rest already makes a big difference. And always remember, behind every Alzheimer's diagnosis there is a person with a history, with love to give and receive, a person who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect until the end. In the next chapter, we're going to talk a little about what causes Alzheimer's. It's a complicated subject, but I'll try to explain it in the simplest way possible, as if I were telling my grandchildren. Would you like to continue listening? What causes Alzheimer's? Unraveling the mystery of the brain. My dears, now we're going to talk about something that many people wonder about. What causes Alzheimer's? It's a difficult question, you know. Even the smartest doctors don't have all the answers yet, but I'll try to explain what I understood, the way I explain it to my grandchildren. Imagine that our brain is like a very, very old city, a city full of streets, buildings, and people. Each part of this city has an important function. Some areas store our memories, others control our movements, Others still help us speak and understand what others are saying. Now think that Alzheimer's is like a very strong storm that starts hitting this city. At first, the storm is weak, barely noticeable. Maybe one or two tiles fall from a roof, a street sign gets crooked. These are those small forgetful moments we have at the beginning of the disease. But over time, the storm gets stronger. Entire streets start to get blocked. Buildings collapse, people get lost. This is how Alzheimer's acts in our brain. It gradually destroys important parts of our brain city. But what causes this storm? Well, scientists have discovered that there are two main things that happen in the brain of someone with Alzheimer's: amyloid plaques. Imagine that these plaques are like a pile of garbage that accumulates in the streets of our brain city. This garbage is made of a protein called amyloid. Normally, our brain knows how to get rid of this garbage. But in people with Alzheimer's, for some reason, the garbage starts to accumulate. It's as if the city's garbage collectors stopped working. The garbage keeps piling up, blocking the streets, disrupting traffic. In our brain, this means that nerve cells can no longer communicate properly with each other. I remember when I was a child, and there was a garbage collectors' strike in my city. In a few days, the garbage accumulated so much that it became difficult to walk on the streets. It's more or less how these amyloid plaques affect our brain. Neurofibrillary tangles. Now, think of the tangles as if they were the light poles of our brain city. These poles are made of a protein called tau. In a healthy brain, these poles are well aligned, lighting up the streets and helping everything to function properly. But in Alzheimer's, it's as if these poles started to bend and tangle with each other. They form knots. They all get crooked. Result: the streets get dark, people get lost, nothing works right. I had a neighbor, Mr. Wilson, who was an electrician. He always said, if the wiring is all tangled up, nothing works right. That's exactly what happens with these tangles in our brain. Now, why does this happen? Why do some people develop these plaques and tangles and others don't? That's the big question scientists are still trying to answer. They've discovered that some things increase our chances of having Alzheimer's. Age. The older we get, the more likely we are to develop the disease. That's why we see so many cases among us older folks. Genetics. Sometimes Alzheimer's runs in the family. If your parents or siblings had the disease, you're more likely to develop it too. It's like grandma's cake recipe that's passed down from generation to generation. Only in this case, unfortunately, it's a recipe we don't want to inherit. Lifestyle. It seems that the way we live also influences it. People who don't exercise, who smoke, who have high blood pressure or diabetes, seem to be more likely to develop Alzheimer's. Education and mental activity. Interestingly, people who studied more and who keep their brain active, reading, doing crossword puzzles, learning new things, seem to have a slightly lower chance of having the disease. It's as if study and mental activities were a kind of vaccine for the brain. I remember my elementary school teacher, Mrs. Anderson. She was always saying, "Children, study. Knowledge is the only thing that no one can take away from you." It seems she was right in more ways than one. Brain trauma. People who have suffered severe head injuries also seem to be more likely to develop Alzheimer's later in life. That's why it's so important to wear a helmet when riding a bicycle or motorcycle. But it's important to remember, my dears, that having one or more of these risk factors doesn't mean you will develop Alzheimer's. And not having any of them doesn't guarantee you'll be free from the disease either. It's like playing the lottery. Some factors can increase your chances, but nothing is guaranteed. What we do know is that Alzheimer's is a complex disease. It's probably not caused by a single thing, but by a combination of factors that we're still trying to fully understand. It's frustrating, I know. Sometimes I find myself thinking, why haven't they found a cure yet? But then I remember how much progress has already been made. When I was young, we hardly talked about Alzheimer's. Today, we know so much more. Scientists are working hard, and I have hope that one day they will find not only the cause but also the cure. In the meantime, what we can do is take good care of our brain. How? Well, that's the subject for our next chapter. We'll talk about how we can try to prevent Alzheimer's and keep our brain healthy for longer. What do you think? Do you want to keep listening? Preventing Alzheimer's, taking care of our brain treasure. My dears, now that we've talked about what Alzheimer's is and what might cause it, let's talk about something very important, how we can try to prevent this disease and keep our brain healthy for longer. After all, our brain is our greatest treasure, isn't it? You know, when I was young, nobody talked much about brain health. We worried about the heart, about bones, but the brain, that seemed to take care of itself. But now we know that's not quite the case. Our brain needs care, just as much as the rest of the body. I'll share with you some things I've learned over the years, both from doctors and from my own life experience. These are small habits that can make a big difference in our brain health. Move your body, my dear. First of all, move your body. I know, sometimes it hurts here, it hurts there, but believe me, exercising is one of the best things we can do for our brain. I remember my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson. She started taking walks every day after she retired. At first, she could barely go around the block, but over time, she got stronger. Today, at 85, she walks for an hour every day. And you know what she told me the other day? Mr. Johnson, I've never felt so good in the head. I can even do crossword puzzles now. Doctors say that exercise increases blood flow to the brain, which helps keep brain cells healthy. It doesn't have to be anything complicated, a walk, a dance, even gardening. The important thing is to move. Feed that brain well. Food. Who doesn't like a good meal, right? But we have to think not only about what pleases the palate, but also about what's good for our brain. Doctors talk a lot about something called the Mediterranean diet. At first I thought, well, I'm not Mediterranean, but then I understood that's not quite it. This diet is basically eating more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, fish, and olive oil. My daughter taught me to put more fish on the menu. At first I found it a bit strange, but now I love it, especially sardines and salmon. It seems these fish have something called omega-3, which is very good for the brain. And we can't forget about fruits, especially dark ones like blueberries, blackberries, and grapes. My grandson says they're like superheroes for the brain, full of antioxidants that protect our cells. Sleep well, my child. Sleep. When we're young, we often don't value it. But now I realize how much difference a good night's sleep makes. It's during sleep that our brain cleans house, eliminating toxins that have accumulated during the day. I had a friend, Mr. Jack, who always boasted about sleeping only 4 hours a night. Time is money, he used to say. But over time, he started having memory problems. The doctor explained that prolonged lack of sleep can increase the risk of Alzheimer's. So, my dears, let's value our 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. It's a true elixir of youth for the brain. Keep your mind active. Remember Mrs. Thompson, my teacher that I mentioned before. She always said, the mind is like a knife. If you don't use it, it rusts. And wouldn't you know she was right? Keeping the brain active is fundamental. Reading a good book, doing crossword puzzles, learning something new. All of this helps create new connections in the brain, which can help prevent Alzheimer's. I myself started learning how to use the computer at 70 years old. At first, I thought I'd never get it. That mouse seemed to have a life of its own. But with patience and persistence, I learned. And you know what? I feel smarter now than I did 20 years ago. Cultivate friendships. My dears, we can't forget the importance of friendships and social interaction, talking, laughing, exchanging ideas. All of this is very good for our brain. I have a group of friends with whom I play dominoes every week. Sometimes we argue over the game, but in the end, we always laugh together. These moments are precious not only for the heart, but also for the brain. Scientists say that more sociable people have a lower risk of developing dementia. It's as if each conversation, each laugh, were an exercise for the brain. Control stress. Stress. That modern-day evil. It seems like everyone is stressed these days, doesn't it? But did you know that prolonged stress can be very bad for the brain? When we're stressed, our body produces a hormone called cortisol. A little cortisol is normal and even necessary, but when we have chronic stress, excess cortisol can damage brain cells. That's why it's important to find ways to relax. I, for example, love taking care of my plants. When I'm in the garden talking to my rose bushes, I feel that all problems become smaller. Others like to meditate, do yoga, or simply sit in silence for a few minutes. The important thing is to find something that helps us calm our minds. Take care of your heart to take care of your brain. Finally, my dears, we can't forget that what's good for the heart is also good for the brain. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. All of these can increase the risk of Alzheimer's. That's why it's important to have regular checkups, take medications as the doctor directs, and maintain healthy habits. I remember my father who used to say, better to prevent than to cure, and how right he was. In conclusion, my dears, taking care of the brain is like tending a garden. We need to water it every day, remove the weeds, and have patience to see the flowers bloom. We can't guarantee that we'll never have Alzheimer's, but we can certainly do our part to keep our brains healthy for longer. And remember, it's never too late to start. I started taking better care of myself after 60, and I feel the difference every day. Every small change counts. In the next chapter, we'll talk about how to recognize the first signs of Alzheimer's. It's a delicate subject, but a very important one. After all, the sooner we identify it, the sooner we can seek help. What do you think? Do you want to continue hearing the story? Recognizing the first signs of Alzheimer's, a gentle guide. My dears, now we're going to talk about a somewhat delicate but very important subject: how to recognize the first signs of Alzheimer's. It's a topic that can be a bit scary, I know, but remember, knowledge is power. The more we know, the better prepared we'll be to take care of ourselves and our loved ones. Before we begin, I want you to know something. Forgetting where we left our keys once in a while or the name of a famous actor doesn't mean we have Alzheimer's. We all have memory lapses sometimes, especially as we age. The important thing is to identify when these forgetful moments start to affect our daily lives more seriously. I'm going to share with you some signs that may indicate the onset of Alzheimer's, based on what I've learned from doctors and my own experience caring for friends and family members with the disease. Problems with recent memory. The first sign we usually notice is difficulty remembering recent information. The person may perfectly remember things that happened 40 years ago, but can't remember what they ate for lunch. I remember my friend Eleanor. She was always the type of person who remembered everyone's birthday. Suddenly, she started forgetting important appointments and conversations we'd had the day before. At first, we thought it was just distraction, but over time we realized it was something more serious: difficulty planning or solving problems. Another sign can be difficulty dealing with numbers or following a plan. For example, someone who has always taken care of household bills may start having problems managing the budget or following a recipe they've known for years. My neighbor, Mr. Albert, was an accountant and loved doing tax returns for the whole family. One day his son noticed there were several errors in the calculations. It was the first sign that something wasn't right. Difficulty completing familiar tasks. Everyday tasks like preparing a meal or remembering the rules of a card game the person has played for years can become challenging. Mrs. Celeste, my sister-in-law, was always a great cook, but one day, in the middle of preparing her famous cornbread, she stopped and just stared at the ingredients, not knowing what to do next. It was a sad moment for all of us. Confusion with time or place. People with Alzheimer's can lose track of time. They may have difficulty understanding something that isn't happening immediately. Sometimes they may even forget where they are or how they got there. I remember when my friend Joseph got lost coming back from the bakery. He had lived in the same neighborhood for 50 years, but that day he couldn't find his way back home. It was scary for him and for the family. Problems with vision and spatial perception. Some people start having difficulty reading, judging distances, or determining colors or contrasts. This can cause problems with driving, for example. My cousin Elisa, who had always been a confident driver, started having difficulties parking the car and judging distances in traffic. That's when the family realized something wasn't right. Problems with words in speaking or writing. People with Alzheimer's may have difficulty following or participating in a conversation. They might stop in the middle of a sentence with no idea how to continue, or they might repeat the same thing several times. Mr. Anthony, my neighbor, had always been a natural storyteller, but we started to notice that he would stop in the middle of sentences as if he had lost his train of thought. Sometimes he would use the wrong words for common objects, calling a clock a time marker, for example, misplacing things. We've all put our keys in the wrong place from time to time, but a person with Alzheimer's might put things in completely unusual places and then not be able to retrace their steps to find them. My sister once found the TV remote in the refrigerator. At first, we thought it was funny, but when it started happening frequently, we realized it was a warning sign. Impaired judgment. People with Alzheimer's may experience changes in judgment or decision-making. For example, they may have difficulty handling money or may dress inappropriately for the weather. I remember when Mrs. Carmen, always so elegant, showed up at Sunday Mass wearing a heavy coat on an intensely hot day. That's when her daughter realized something wasn't right. Withdrawal from work or social activities. A person with Alzheimer's may start to withdraw from hobbies, work projects, or social activities. They may have trouble keeping up with their favorite team or remembering how to practice their favorite hobby. My friend Peter, who had always been the life of the party, started refusing invitations and isolating himself. At first we thought it was just a phase, but over time we realized it was a sign of something more serious. Changes in mood and personality. People with Alzheimer's may show changes in mood and personality. They may become confused, suspicious, depressed, fearful, or anxious. They may get easily upset at home, at work, with friends, or in places where they are out of their comfort zone. My dear wife Mary, always so sweet and patient, started having outbursts of anger over trivial matters. It was one of the hardest signs for me to accept, as it seemed she was becoming a different person. My dears, it's important to remember that having one or more of these signs doesn't necessarily mean the person has Alzheimer's. Some of these changes may be a normal part of aging, or may be caused by other medical conditions. That's why if you notice several of these signs in yourself or someone you love, the best thing to do is to see a doctor. I remember when I noticed some of these signs in myself, I was terrified, thinking I was developing Alzheimer's. But when I went to the doctor, we discovered it was just a side effect of a medication I was taking. After adjusting the medication, the symptoms disappeared. So don't be afraid to seek help. Early diagnosis can make a big difference in the treatment and quality of life of the person with Alzheimer's and their caregivers. And always remember, even if the diagnosis is Alzheimer's, it doesn't mean the end. With proper care, love, and support, it's possible to live well and with dignity for many years. In the next chapter, we'll talk about how to care for someone with Alzheimer's. It's a challenging journey, but also full of moments of love and learning. What do you think? Do you want to continue hearing our story? Caring for someone with Alzheimer's, a journey of love and patience. My dears, now we've come to a very special and, I admit, somewhat difficult chapter. We're going to talk about how to care for someone with Alzheimer's. It's a journey that requires a lot of love, patience, and strength, but one that can also bring moments of deep connection and learning. I remember well when I started caring for my dear Mary after her diagnosis. At first I felt lost and scared, but over time, with the help of doctors, friends, and family, I learned, and that's what I want to share with you today. Establish a routine. One of the first things I learned was the importance of establishing a routine. People with Alzheimer's generally feel more secure and less confused when they know what to expect from their day. With Mary, we created a daily routine. We would wake up at the same time, have breakfast together, take a walk in the garden, have lunch, rest in the afternoon, and at night before bed, we would look at the family photo album together. This routine brought comfort and stability to her. Simplify tasks. As the disease progresses, simple tasks can become challenging. It's important to simplify activities as much as possible. For example, when Mary started having difficulties dressing, we replaced clothes with many buttons or zippers with easier-to-wear pieces. In the bathroom, we marked with colored labels the products she used most frequently. Maintain communication. Communicating with someone with Alzheimer's can be challenging, but it's crucial. I learned to speak slowly and clearly, use short and simple phrases, and maintain eye contact. Sometimes Mary couldn't find the right words to express herself. In those moments, I tried to guess what she wanted to say, but without pressuring her. I discovered that often a hug or holding her hand communicated more than words. Encourage independence. It's tempting to do everything for the person with Alzheimer's, but it's important to encourage independence whenever possible. This helps maintain dignity and self-esteem. Even in the more advanced stages of the disease, I always tried to involve Mary in small tasks, like folding napkins or watering the plants. The smile of satisfaction on her face when completing these tasks was priceless. Maintain safety. Safety is a constant concern when caring for someone with Alzheimer's. It's necessary to adapt the house to prevent accidents. We installed safety locks on doors, removed loose rugs to prevent falls, and stored dangerous objects like medications and cleaning products in secure locations. We also put an identification bracelet on Mary in case she got lost. Take care of physical health. People with Alzheimer's may forget to eat, drink water, or take their medications. It's important to closely monitor physical health. I created a reminder system for Mary's medication times and always made sure she was eating well and staying properly hydrated. We also kept up with regular medical appointments. Stimulate the mind. Although Alzheimer's affects memory and cognitive abilities, it's important to continue stimulating the person's mind. With Mary, we would play simple games, listen to music, look at old photos, and talk about past memories. These activities seemed to bring her comfort, and sometimes even awakened memories we thought were lost. Deal with behavior changes. Alzheimer's can cause significant changes in behavior. The person may become agitated, aggressive, or have hallucinations. It's important to remember that this is part of the disease and not the person's fault. When Mary became agitated, I tried to distract her with something she liked, such as listening to her favorite music or looking at photos of the grandchildren. I learned that often the best approach was simply to accept her where she was emotionally, without trying to argue or correct her. Take care of yourself. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's can be physically and emotionally exhausting. It's crucial that caregivers also take care of themselves. At first, I tried to do everything alone, but I soon realized that wasn't sustainable. I learned to accept help from family and friends, to participate in support groups for caregivers, and to reserve time for myself, even if it was just to take a walk or read a book. Appreciate the good moments. Although Alzheimer's is a difficult journey, there can also be moments of joy, connection, and even laughter. It's important to appreciate these moments. I remember one afternoon when Mary, who wasn't talking much anymore, suddenly started singing a song we used to dance to when we were young. In that moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I had known for so many years, and we danced together in the living room. It was a precious moment that I will cherish forever. Plan for the future. As the disease progresses, it's important to plan for the future. This includes discussions about long-term care, legal and financial issues, and end-of-life wishes. It was difficult to have these conversations with Mary in the early stages of the disease, but I was grateful we did. Knowing that I was following her wishes brought me comfort in the most difficult moments. Remember the love. Finally, my dears, the most important thing I learned caring for Mary was to always remember the love. Even on the hardest days, when she didn't recognize me or became agitated, I remembered our love and all the years we shared together. Alzheimer's can steal memories, but it can't steal love. And it's that love that gives us strength to continue day after day. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's is one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, sad, and even angry. But there were also moments of deep connection, unexpected laughter, and a love so strong it felt like my heart would burst. If you're caring for someone with Alzheimer's, I want you to know that you're not alone. There is help available, from doctors, support groups, and from friends and family. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. And always remember, what you're doing is an incredible act of love. Even on days when it seems like nothing you do is making a difference, know that your presence and your care mean the world to the person with Alzheimer's, even if they can't express it. In the next chapter, we'll talk about the most recent research on Alzheimer's and hopes for the future. After all, science doesn't stop, and every day we're getting closer to understanding this disease better and, who knows, finding a cure. What do you think? Do you want to continue hearing our story? A message of hope and a special request. My dears, we've come to the end of our learning journey about Alzheimer's. I hope these stories and information have touched your hearts and helped you better understand this disease that affects so many families. Always remember, knowledge is our greatest weapon against Alzheimer's. The more we know, the better we can take care of ourselves and our loved ones. Science advances every day, and I have hope that soon we'll have better treatments and, who knows, even a cure. But for now, the most important things are love, patience, and care. Whether it's for a family member, a friend, or even a stranger you see on the street looking confused, a little understanding and kindness can make all the difference. Now, my dears, I have a special request for you. If this video touched your heart, if you learned something new, or if you think this information can help others, please don't keep it to yourself. Give this video a like to show your support. This helps more people find this important information. And if you have a moment, leave a comment telling us what you thought. Your opinion is very valuable and can inspire others to learn more about Alzheimer's. And most importantly, share this video with your friends and family. The more people who know about Alzheimer's, the better prepared we'll be as a society to face this disease. Your share could be the first step for someone to seek help or better understand what a loved one is going through. Remember, my dears, knowledge is like a light in the darkness. The more we share, the brighter it becomes. And together, we can illuminate the path to a future where Alzheimer's is no longer a frightening mystery, but a condition we can understand, treat, and maybe one day cure. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and never forget, love is stronger than any disease. Until next time, my dears.